You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech.
With your host, Omar and Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, Alzheimer's is something that we know affects so many different people. It's up there with diabetes, but the problem with Alzheimer's, unlike diabetes, is that it's almost at a point where we feel like it's an accepted part of getting older and that it could happen. I think it's unacceptable. This is why I'm very excited to have our guest today, Christian Howell, who's the CEO of Cognito, which is a neurotech company that's specifically tackling Alzheimer's along with other neurodegenerative diseases. Christian, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing?
Omar, I'm doing great. It's great to be on the show, and I so much appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm a big fan of your guys' website. I really like it. It's for those who are interested, go to cognitotx.com. Beautiful website. Being a marketer, I do like cool looking websites, but more specifically ones that are very aligned with their mission. So maybe before we get into Cognito, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how long you been in the industry for, and like, what were you doing before you got into medical devices?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's in a lot of ways it's really informed my leadership style, I think, and sort of my focus and our focus at Cognito. So my career sort of has had three chapters. The first is I was an officer in the United States Navy. That was an unbelievably impactful time for me. Was in the service during September 11th. And was overseas during the Afghanistan campaigns. And it really sort of brought front and center for me the idea of service-focused leadership and making sure that we're, focusing on others besides ourselves. Like many, I was recruited out of the military by a medical device company. And then I really started on what was about a 20-year career in medical devices, mostly between Cognito and Medtronic. And it was on the commercial side. Leading big sales organizations, regional management, marketing, things like that. I had a really interesting last role at Medtronic, which was I led value-based healthcare for Omar Ishrak. So if you remember, Omar had this vision of transforming Medtronic from a $30 billion company with revenues based in volume to a $30 billion company with revenues based in value. And he knew to do that, he had to build really robust relationships with health systems and payers and really understand how data could drive decisions, so we could get the right patient and the right product to the right patient at the right time. So that was an unbelievable experience. It gave me an opportunity to learn not just directly from Omar, but to learn directly from Jeff Martha, who's the CEO there now, and to learn from Rick Kuntz, who was the chief scientific and medical officer. So it was a great experience. And the big learning for me was that data was coming to healthcare, and that we were going to make better decisions about appropriateness and which devices should go to which patients. And so I went and talked to Josh Mackauer at Stanford Biodesign. And I said, Josh, I have this idea for this platform of a company that takes real world data and turns it into evidence so big decisions can be made. And he said, yep, it's a great idea. We're invested in a company called Aetion that is doing just that. And they're looking for a head of their medtech group. And we think you'd be a good match. So I went over to Aetion for about 3 years, and that was unbelievably educational for me in the sense that I got to see how other medical device companies think about data and evidence. I got to work very closely with the FDA and, the incredible work that Jeff Shern and others are over there were doing in trying to better leverage real world data into label expansions and to work with payers as they were trying to figure out, how can we use data to figure out which patients should get what. And one of my clients was Cognito. And I'd gotten to know the CEO. I thought they had a really unbelievably interesting story. And then Rick Kuntz, who was the chief medical officer at Medtronic, joined the board. And I got to connect with him, and he said, hey, look, I think there's something really interesting here. So in October of last year, I joined Cognito as the chief commercial officer. And then in August, I was asked to step up into the CEO role. So that was, I am unbelievably sort of blessed and fortunate that I get to lead this team, because I think we're doing, to your earlier comments, we're doing something that I think is going to be impactful to a group of patients that are in such dire need of a solution.
I love that. And thanks for sharing your background. I'm always fascinated by Our industry is like quote unquote coaching tree of where people came from and everything. And of course, for you to spend time with Omar Ishraq and Jeff Martha is great. I'm wondering, aside from things on the business side about data and everything, in terms of like leadership, whether it's Omar or Jeff or somebody else, uh, what were some of the more substantial lessons that you sort of walked away from from Medtronic that sort of made you who you are today? All right, everyone, quick commercial break. If you're a MedTech CEO slash founder, or maybe you're a sales or marketing leader at a startup or a scale up, you're going to want to listen to this. Are you struggling to get in front of your ideal audience, whether that's investors or perhaps clinicians who want to adopt your product? Maybe you're getting ghosted. You send emails and messages and nothing comes back, nothing happens, right? Or worse, nobody knows who you are, right? In business, visibility is everything. And I always tell people, if you want to persuade before persuasion can happen, you have to learn how to get attention. So if your sales team is desperate for traction, clinicians don't know your name, investors have never heard of you, you're losing opportunities every day. And that needs to change now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. That's where my company, Katib & Co. comes in. We don't just do marketing, we do growth. We figure out how to engineer markets by creating magnetic messaging that makes you impossible to ignore. And we build high impact strategies, of course, using social media, but other channels such as email, text, and others to help turn content and messaging into commercial pipeline, and it leads into closed deals. As an example, we worked with a surgical robotics company in raising a $31 million Series A, and then they needed help on their pre-market release. So we packed their CRM with 198 surgeon leads and nurtured them down. That ended up becoming 4 closed hospitals. 4 hospitals closed and adopted this technology within a period of 6 months, and they got 2 great key opinion leaders in the process. So whether you're a startup founder wearing too many hats, or maybe you have a marketing team that just spread too thin and they don't have the expertise, my team and I plug in and partner up with your company, and we amplify your reach. From crafting powerful sales scripts to optimizing your team's demo calls, creating content, having it go out on a consistent basis, we transform your outreach into a growth engine. So if you're ready to dominate your market, you're ready to become a no name and people to know of you and take your calls and take your meetings, I want you to act right now. Don't wait anymore, because you've already wasted plenty of time. Go to growmymedtech.com. That's growmymedtech.com. And I want you to schedule a quick call. My team and I will give you a free analysis with 2 to 3 actionable ideas. There's no strings attached. And if we're a fit, great. We can get partnered up and we can help you go to the next level. And if not, look, the ideas are always free. So do not wait and don't waste any more time. Go to growmymedtech.com right now, and let's make you the go-to name in your niche. Now, let's get back to the episode. Feel free to go and look ones too. Yeah.
I love that question because it's so tangible for me, right? So, I will tell you candidly, I had a chance to work for sort of murderer's row of CEOs at Medtronic. So at one point I worked with Scott Drake, and then I worked with Brian Hansen and worked with Chris Berry and Omar and Jeff. So it was unbelievable to kind of get this chance. And then I've seen all of these other folks that were sort of counterparts that have gone on to become CEOs of companies. But I'll never forget, there was a time I was traveling with Omar, and he was getting ready to step down, and Jeff was coming in. And I remember saying to him, Omar, I'm fascinated to know what sort of piece of advice that you're going to give to Jeff. And it was really interesting because I thought I was going to get this sort of, Harvard Business School perspective on leading a $30 billion conglomerate. And what he said to me was, he said, Christian, it's the easiest advice I can give, which is fidelity to the mission. He said, Earl Bakken did Medtronic an enormous favor, 50 years ago or 75 years ago when it was founded. And he set a mission that is not only aspirational, but it's also strategic. And, I think about that all the time because, when you're in a company like Cognito and you have a technology that you can do all of these different things with, it becomes unbelievably important to think about sort of what is our mission, right? We're trying to empower the lives of patients for a brighter future, right? So that means, do we go do X or Y? Do we invest in this? And, the thing that, whether it's a big company or small, I had a CEO at Aetion, Carolyn McGill, who loved to say, startups don't often die of starvation. They die of indigestion, meaning that they try to do too much and that they're not sort of guided by a mission. And I think about the organizations that I've been a part of, whether it was the Navy or whether it was Medtronic or whether it was Aetion, and what they all had in common was they had this really omnipresent mission that gave them guidance, not just when they were trying to encourage employees, but when they were making, substantive business decisions. And it was so impactful to me that Omar gave me this sort of perspective that I could carry with me anywhere I went, which was make sure that the organizations that you lead and the people you lead have real clarity to what they're trying to accomplish. Because if they don't, oftentimes those day-to-day challenges can be overwhelming, and being able to rely on a mission or to be able to make a decision based on where a mission or a North Star guides you. For any company, it's really pressure test your mission. Pressure test your mission that it's not only aspirational to your employees, but it also, when times are challenging and you need to make tough decisions, it guides you. And that was the single piece of, I think the biggest piece of advice that Omar gave to Jeff. And I love that I was there to sort of, at that handoff to understand what the communication was.
No, I think it's a very good point that you often see, especially in the startup world, a lot of companies who, I think because of the fact that they're trying to raise more money, they want to get a big TAM. And so as a result of that, they sort of split themselves into all kind of different directions. But the problem is that, like, I don't know about you, but I know a lot of companies who have failed because of a lack of focus, but I don't know any company that failed because they were like too focused,
I mean, if you think about Medtronic, right? What Earl Bakken said coming out of his garage, he had gone to get a loan. They came back and said, we don't really understand what your business is doing. And so he went down and he wrote that, okay, what are we? We're a biomedical engineering company. And what is our focus? It's to, alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. Like, that's what we're going to do. And that means if we develop as a cardiac company, but we want to pivot to a surgical or a neurovascular or a neuro company, we go back to the mission. And it doesn't say we're a pacemaker company. What it says is we're a biomedical engineering company. So that's really our roots, right? And then we have this ability to then ask that question. Is this thing that we're going to do next, does it alleviate pain? Does it restore health? Does it extend life? And so I love that it's that practical. At least at Medtronic, it was at Aetion. Obviously, the Navy is, support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Like, that one's pretty clear too. And, that's the thing in a young company like Cognito, really trying to make sure that we develop a mission that gives not just real direction of what we're trying to do today around Alzheimer's disease, but also when we win there and we want to go impact other patients, do we have that sort of North Star that guides us in the right way? So, I mean, you're right. Like, I think it's a lot about focus for young companies.
And as we kind of dive into Cognito, so I really love that you thought about it like that, because again, I think if we, no offense, I love all the babies of medtech, ortho and cardiac and everything, but neuro is definitely, I don't want to say the most exciting, but there's definitely a lot of attention there. Granted, like somebody like Elon Musk with Neuralink, that it helps, on the PR front. But I think the other side of it is that there's so much pioneering to be done that it's very easy to sort of get diluted down. I love that as a neurotech company, you can cover so many things. And I think that's the application approach, which is you cover one area, you can sort of tangentially apply to others. I love that you guys chose one, is that your beachhead is a really big problem being Alzheimer's, and that's what you're mainly focused on your mission. But as a startup who can get to a growth stage company, you're able to evolve that so that after you, sort of own that beachhead, there's this other sort of chapter of the company. So from an investment standpoint, I really love that story. First of all, why Alzheimer's? And what, how did the company first get started? Like, what was that guiding mission?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of the history of it, because I think it does inform Alzheimer's and what we're trying to solve now. So, Cognito was really founded out of MIT. and it was two really remarkable neuroscientists. One is a gentleman by the name of Ed Boyden, who is pioneering the work of optogenetics. And so, what I say to people all the time is I always want to put myself in rooms where I have the most to learn. And being the CEO of a company in neurotech, I'm surrounded by some very bright people who I ask to simplify things for me all the time. So I think of optogenetics as using different types of light frequency to target specific areas of the brain. And then there was a neuroscientist by the name of Li Wei Sai, who was working on the idea of evoked 40 hertz gamma oscillation. So the idea that if you could stimulate the neurons of the brain to oscillate at a particular frequency, which is called gamma, then the brain starts to express specific genes and proteins that are enormously important for brain structure and for brain volume. And so then what we did was we looked at all of the different conditions that could be impacted by this, right? So neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and MS. We looked at conditions even in metabolic health, and sort of overall brain health. But the one that we really directed our attentions to was Alzheimer's, right? And for an enormous, for lots of reasons, right? There are currently 6.5 million patients in the United States with Alzheimer's disease that do not have a therapy that will dramatically slow the progression of the disease. There are probably 10 million patients in the United States that have what's called mild cognitive impairment, that have a high likelihood of progressing to Alzheimer's. And, about 8 million of them are undiagnosed. So fortunately, there are real advancements coming out in diagnostic tools to help bring those patients out of the dark. But what we're going to have is we're going to have this enormous influx of patients that don't have a therapy that can help slow the decline in both cognition and function and preserve brain volume, which is incredibly important for these patients. So we looked at it and we said, not just because the market opportunity is attractive and the total addressable market, but we felt like that was a place where if we took Spectris, this combination of those two sciences, if we took it to market, that was the place where we could have the largest impact. And so what we then did was we then said, okay, how is the best way to deliver that therapy? We really think of ourselves as a kind of a non-pharmaceutical, like what's the best way to deliver that therapy? And what we did a bunch of UX research on Alzheimer's patients. And what we heard was a simple, self-guided, intuitive, at-home therapy that the way that the therapy works is it's a headset that patients wear and it's glasses that they wear. We use the optic and the auditory nerve. We use flashing light and sound to gain access through the optic and auditory nerve to stimulate the neurons to have this sort of enormous impact. And the question we're constantly asking ourselves within Cognito is, what if you could dramatically slow the decline of Alzheimer's for 6.5 million patients using a non-invasive neurostimulant at home so that those patients can be treated effectively, they can be treated safely, they can be treated cost effectively, and they can do it within the safety and the comfort of their home, because Alzheimer's is one of the reasons why it's such in many ways, a compelling disease is that I like to think of it as a +1 disease, right? That it not just impacts the patient, but impacts the family members and the caregivers. And so that's why it's so important, I think, to be thinking about the environment in which that therapy is delivered, because you want to make sure that you're not burdening or overwhelming the caregiver. So we're sort of singularly focused right now on Alzheimer's. We have, just to give you a sense of where we are, we've completed our phase 2, which showed really remarkable slowing the decline in cognition, slowing the decline in function, and preserving brain volume. We did all of that with no adverse events. And we are currently about 540 patients enrolled in what will ultimately be a 670 patient phase 3 sham controlled clinical trial, which will be one of, if not the largest clinical trial ever conducted in neurotech. And we're excited about that because I think it'll give us an enormous amount of evidence as we think about our regulatory submission, as we think about, conversations with competition, conversations with payers, conversations with CMS. We are novel in that way, that we are going to come to market as a medical device with a really, a level of clinical evidence that is really without compare in this space.
That's amazing. And I'm wondering, for Cognito, have you guys, it might be too early at this point, but have you partnered up with some of the associations like the Alzheimer's Association, for example? And, what have some of your partnerships look like?
Yeah, so we are in constant communication with the Alzheimer's Association. One, just so that we can be supportive of their efforts as they educate and then they also provide really wonderful resources to companies like ours in scientific advisory and gaining commercial perspective. But we also are really excited to have the Alzheimer's Association as a sort of a part of our organization. Like, we really encourage our employees to, we have a thing within our company, which is giving folks a day off to go and support the Alzheimer's Association in their community, right? Because we know we want to be in service to others organization. It's one of our cultural pillars. And sometimes that service is to each other. Sometimes that service is to our family members, but a lot of the times it's in service to our patients, right? And we want to make sure we understand their plight. We understand what they're going through. So we really try to support the Alzheimer's Association that way. We've also received, support from the ADDF. We've participated with the Us versus Alzheimer's groups. So that's the one thing I will say that I am so overwhelmingly impressed by the Alzheimer's group is it is a all hands on deck effort to try to improve the lives of these patients. There are not silos. There are not, I'm creating a monoclonal antibody solution and you're creating a physics-based solution and that person's creating a GLP-1 based solution. Like, I think everyone understands that not only can it be a polypharmacy approach from a therapeutic perspective, but it needs to be a polyorganizational approach in trying to make sure that we educate and inform and that we're talking to our governmental leaders. We're lobbying. We're doing all of those things to support research and attention to this space, because it really is, to me, one of the most, and this is coming from a guy married to an oncologist, one of what we're seeing in neurodegenerative conditions in Alzheimer's is just, it's unbelievably destructive to families. So I love the
And I don't know, correct me if I have the wrong figure, but like last I checked, like just here in the US, like there's about 6-ish million people living with Alzheimer's. Is that about the right figure?
Right. That's like just in the US, and that number grows dramatically. Much like a lot of chronic conditions, as we see, 10,000 people a day turning 65 and living longer, right? That you mentioned earlier, I think it's a really interesting observation, which is a lot of attention has been paid to, diabetes and cardiovascular disease and obesity and what it's allowing people, cancer, and it's allowing people to live longer with what are now chronic conditions. But we have yet to really figure out the brain, and we have yet to really figure out, some of these neurodegenerative conditions. So we're going to see a real influx of patients, unfortunately, with Alzheimer's. The last number I saw is that by 2030, we expect Alzheimer's, the financial impact of Alzheimer's, meaning caregivers having to leave the workforce and finances, to be $1 trillion. To think that there's a disease condition that is having that large, not just a human impact in the 15 million people by 2030, but also $1 trillion of impact. It's a now issue for us without question.
Yeah. And, with my medical background, I was always aware of Alzheimer's, but somebody that really sort of inspired me to look more into it. That's why I was excited to have you on the show. Do you know Paula Rutledge by any chance?
I don't.
I'm gonna get you connected. So Paula's the founder of Legacy MedSearch. She's a very well-known, well-respected recruiter in the space. And something that you'll notice about Paula is that when she goes to conferences, she's wearing a hat. You know, she's like extremely fashionable, but there's a reason why she wears a hat. The reason why she wears hats is that she actually wears hats in honor of her mother, Jean Waters, who was affected by Alzheimer's and passed away in 2019. So she's a very strong advocate of innovation in the space and partnership. And so, wonderful, wonderful lady. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. So I'll have to definitely connect you. And I think this is the one. Yeah, one of the beauties of. Yeah, I kind of love that about our space is that it's very large and big, but in many ways it's small. And through the wonders of the internet and podcasts, we just get connected to the right people and partners who share the same vision and values.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time. I was really conflicted leaving the military and going into kind of sales, that I remember talking to a mentor of mine that I wanted to find a balance of a profession where I felt like I was doing well and doing good. And it was talking to some physician friends of mine and talking to some folks that were in nonprofit and healthcare, sort of saying like, yeah, there's an opportunity. Like if you work the sort of innovation side and you think about really bringing novel technologies to market that could be massively impactful, then what you're going to find is it's going to resonate with folks. And it doesn't mean that you have to bury down that entrepreneurialism or even that ambition or any of those things that we all have to want to do well, but you can find a way to marry that with doing good. And that's the thing that I just find so energizing about Cognito is, if all works out for us at the clinical trial and through regulatory, we're going to be able to make an impact to, I think more than 80% of patients with Alzheimer's disease, which is an enormous impact to the market. So,
Yeah, and on that note, I want to bring up your technology so people can see it. Something that I love is that it is you the company's name is Cognito Therapeutics, and so when people hear the word therapeutics, they might think of like drug delivery and stuff. But you guys are non-pharmaceutical, which I love, just because it gives people a different option. And again, I think this is really the future of medicine, which is nothing wrong with like medication, pharmaceuticals, but I think there's ways to take non-pharmaceutical approaches to augment those kind of therapies and get better results. So let me pan over for those who are watching on YouTube and Spotify. You can see this. If you're not and you're in the car, just go to cognitotx.com. That's cognitotx.com. So let me just share my screen real quick, and maybe you can kind of walk through.
the thing I would say is, I think there's something, this is where I'm so excited to be a part of the neurotech space, which is, I think we're seeing firsthand this idea that many of the things that we thought were going to be solved with chemistry are actually better solved with physics. And I think you're seeing that in neurostimulation. And I think one of the reasons why Neurotech gets to be such a leader in that is that the central nervous system provides an unbelievable on-ramp to access the brain using neurostimulation versus some of the challenges in navigating the blood-brain barrier for biologics or for a more sort of chemistry-based approach. And what I was so excited about is we recently did a survey. We're doing all this sort of pre-market prep that companies do. And we did a survey of, I think, 200 healthcare professionals, and it was neurologists and geriatricians and primary care physicians and neuropsychiatrists. And we asked them the question that, do you believe a medical device can drive a biological change? Now, if you had asked me beforehand, how did I think that they would answer? I would have thought we would have been in the 40 to 50%, that there would have been examples of this in neurostim and some of the things that we're seeing coming out around hypertension and incontinence. But I was thrilled to hit, I think almost 85% said, yeah, of course. Like, we fundamentally believe that a device can stimulate the body to drive biological change, which is exactly what we're doing here. So yeah, so if you look there, you can see, the way that the stimulation is delivered is it's delivered around the lenses, and it's delivered through the earphones. Patients sit with the device for an hour a day. What we have found is there's a really interesting article that was really recently written in Nature that talked about the use of Spectrus AD and some of our patients. And what we've heard sort of two things. One, we've heard that it can be very meditative for patients, right? That they get to sit there, they get to experience, they get this sort of hour where the therapy is being delivered. In the device that will go to market, patients will be able to watch TV. They won't be able to listen to TV, but they'll be able to watch TV or read or, do the Wordle. The other thing that we heard from patients, which I think is so exciting, and one of the reasons why we were able to enroll very rapidly in our trial, beyond just the safety perspective, is also this idea that they're taking control of their disease. That this idea that, every day I'm sitting down and I'm proactively addressing the disease, and I'm really making sure that I'm administering the therapy, and I'm not just, sort of sitting as a recipient for it, but I'm being proactive to it. I sort of love that. I love this idea that people have been issued this enormous challenge in their life with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, but we're giving them the opportunity to be proactive in the way that they treat it.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating as well. And so for those who are like not seeing this seeing the video, essentially what we're looking at is, you can imagine it. I love the design of the product. So essentially, it's over the ear headphones, but if you move the part that goes over your head forward and added glasses to them to hold it, that's essentially what we're seeing. So, and I think that there's always been, we even learned this in medical school, this notion that people who spend time reading a lot, they decrease their the incidence of Alzheimer's, but not everybody, reading is a skill, right? And so not everybody can do that. These, you can just throw these on. So essentially, when they put it on, what is the patient seeing and hearing and experiencing?
Yeah. So there are lights. I want to be careful in what we describe because we are in the middle of a trial. So I don't want to give too much of a description, but there's a stimulant using light and pulsating light. And what that does is it allows a sort of reciprocity of the neurons. So the neurons through the optic nerve are stimulated. They then reciprocate this type of oscillation. And at that oscillation, it begins to key the brain and key the neurons to start to evoke specific genes and proteins that are important for myelination. They are important for synaptic health so that you can increase neuroplasticity. There are all kinds of benefits to getting the neurons of the brain to oscillate at that frequency. And when you and I are here talking, and when we're deep in thought, the neuroplasticity of our brain really ranges, and it can range into the gamma range. But when you start to
Let me
bring this. Yep.
I was gonna say, let me bring this up. At some point, I'll have somebody like Jamie on Joe Rogan doing this, but for now, like, I do all this. Let me bring up the. I found a diagram online so people can kind of see and understand like the gamma versus beta waves, etc. And so essentially, at the very, very top, for those who aren't seeing it, gamma waves are 30 to 100 hertz, and this is for peak and sphere. If you can kind of explain, like, we see here that it's inside peak experiences, but how do we think about gamma waves versus if you go all the way to the bottom at delta waves? Delta waves is like sleep and stuff. So why?
Range of waves. There's a range in which our brains are oscillating, our neurons are oscillating, right? And they, depending on where we are in our day and what the way that our brain is being utilized, we can range from delta, which is deep sleep, through into alpha, which is sort of when you're thinking about sort of relaxation and vegging out in front of the TV, to beta when we're sort of alert and concentrating, all the way up to gamma. And, the gamma waves are the ones that are really the ones that can start to elicit these really interesting preservation of brain structure and volume.
Got it. That makes sense. And I wonder, is this the right way to look at it? Because when I see this, I feel like with gamma waves, they're the highest hertz. So it's almost like just like physical fitness and weightlifting, etc., will extend the your physical health, right? And your overall like well-being. This is almost like the equivalent, but for your brain. So essentially, you're training and working out your brain at a high frequency to make sure that it self-preserves itself against Alzheimer's. Is that the right analogy to look at? Is that okay to think of it like that?
With you, it's the way I oftentimes describe it to folks that I'm first introducing this to, which is you referenced Joe Rogan, right? Like all the time, he's got guests on that talk about the benefit of getting our heart rate above 110 or 130 beats per minute, right? And we know that when we get into those ranges, there is metabolic effect that takes that occurs. And so what we do to stimulate our heart to get those beats up is we do cardiovascular activity. And we know that if we can keep it at that rate for a certain period of time, that sort of metabolic effect endures, which is why you see distance runners and, talking about when you go out for a walk, make sure you do it for, 10,000 steps for a long period of time, because you want to keep that heart rate up, because that's when that metabolic impact. It's the same. There is something very similar with gamma, which is that we know that when you stimulate the brain at gamma, there is a biological effect that occurs. And those genes and proteins that are expressed when you're at gamma are enormously important for brain health and brain volume. And so it is very difficult for anyone to do prolonged gamma, but it is even more difficult for those patients with neurodegenerative conditions to be able to key their brain to oscillate at this frequency, which is why introducing a stimulant, a neurostimulant, to do it is such an interesting approach to the science. And the idea that it can be a non-invasive neurostimulant is, I think, even more compelling. That this idea that I'm not having to implant something in my brain, I'm not having to, but what I'm able to do is I'm able to provide a non-invasive stimulant, access the optic and auditory nerves as on-ramps to the brain, produce this type of oscillatory effect, key those, that expression, and then we get the benefits of it. And whether that's in tests like the ADCS-ADL, which has been helping us measure function, or the mini mental state exam to measure the preservation of cognition, or an MRI to measure the preservation of myelin, which, we know that, brain volume is key in brain health. Preserving myelin is unbelievably important.
And you beat me to it, but the two things that I saw from the science in terms of improving gamma waves is that you have protein and gene expression in two very important areas. One is in synapses. So for those who don't know, like if you look at neurons, the synapse is essentially the connection between different neurons, and then the myelin is sort of the insulation that goes around these neurons, and it's sort of like it insulates and improves things. So can you talk about how does that exactly happen, and then why do you need both of those things? Like, why do you need to improve protein and gene expression in synapses and myelin, and not one over the other?
Yeah. So, I walk carefully out on this creaky branch, knowing that I'm not a neuroscientist or a physician, but the way that I think it's best explained is, one, there's talking about overall neuronal health, right? So we want to make sure that the structure of the neuron is preserved, which is what myelin allows us to do, right? Myelin protects the neuron from plaque buildup. It gives us that, so that gray matter doesn't progress and the white matter is maintained. The synaptic is so important because that's how we think about neuroplasticity and the way that the brain communicates and sends signal. That's the electroactivity of the brain. And so what you want to make sure is that you have strong synaptic health, which is what keys so much of this sort of preservation of cognition and function, right? So the more neuroplasticity that my brain has, the greater health it's in, the greater I'm able to do activities, the greater I'm able to do, process thought, process memories, maintain cognition. And then what I want to make sure is that the structure in which that is happening on top of, which is the neuron, has a strong base and is preserved, which is why the expression of the myelin proteins are so important.
Amazing. Now, in relation to that, so you guys finished a phase 2 study. You called it the Overture study. So essentially, with the Overture, it was a randomized, sham-controlled, double-blind, multi-center 6-month phase 2 trial. For those who may not know, we all know double-blind and randomized. What's sham-controlled, and why is that important?
So what we wanted to do is we wanted to put a group of patients on the therapy, and then we wanted to put a group of patients on a sham, so a device that was very close to, but not evoking 40 hertz. So we could track the way that the diseases progressed in both arms. And so what we were able to show is at the end of the study that we showed a 77% preservation in function in the control group versus the sham group. We showed a 76% preservation of cognition in the control group versus the sham group. And we showed a 70 or 69% preservation of myelin in the control group versus the sham group. Then what we did at the conclusion of the 6 months is we did what was called an open label extension, which is we brought the sham group onto an active therapy. So now everyone was on the active. And what we showed was we showed durability for the active group. So as they stayed on treatment, they continued to see this preservation. And what we saw was an arrest of the decline of the sham group. So now that they were on the active, they were able to see the benefits that we were seeing from the original active group. So those, just to give a sense, those outcomes are so sort of significant and so, very best in class that we really wanted to do everything we could to replicate that in a broader study. So what we did was we went from 6 months to 12 months. We went from 70 patients to 670 patients. We went from 5 sites to 60 sites around the United States, but we kept a lot of that same sham-controlled randomized study design, because if we can show a treatment effect in the 670 participants that's like our phase 2, that will be best in class across any other sort of potentially disease-modifying therapy. And in addition to that, it will also, we had no serious adverse events. And there's a New York Times article that came out today. There's a couple of studies that have come out today that are talking about the risk of some of the more the amyloid focus, the monoclonal amyloid therapies that have come out recently. And there's real concerns about the microhemorrhaging in those patients and what is called ARIA, which is amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, and which is meaning microhemorrhaging. And so this idea that it can not only be very, very effective, but also very, very safe is, that's, I hate to say fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever it is, but we are so vested in making sure that the HOPE trial reads out, because I think it has an opportunity to be unbelievably consequential.
That's the new trial you guys are doing, correct?
That's right. So we are about 540 patients, 550 patients enrolled. I didn't look this morning. So enrolled in that trial. I think we'll hope to have full enrollment by the first quarter of 2025. It'll be a 12-month study. So we would have last patient out somewhere in the second quarter of 2026. And then we're off to the races as it pertains to regulatory submissions and, commercial preparations and all of those.
And you guys are trying to get how many participants? I see 500 plus. So how many participants are you looking to get roughly?
Yeah, so we would like to get 670 participants.
It's a good size.
With a goal of getting, north of 400 completers, right? Nice. One of the things that's really important, it's an important thing to talk about, which is doing clinical research in mild to moderate Alzheimer's patients. Candidly, it's not for the faint of heart. These are patients that have really progressed disease. They have caregivers that have a significant responsibility to take care of these patients. And then those caregivers oftentimes are spouses that are, in their late 70s and 80s, and they also have conditions. So it's why we create a target of, we want to enroll the 670 so we can ensure that we have enough completers to be powered in the study to show the treatment effects that we're looking to show in cognition and in function.
Got it. And for those who are interested, again, they're taking people on for that trial. You can go to Hope Study for AD, Hope Study for AD as in Alzheimer's disease.com, hopestudyforad.com. I'm going to leave it in the show notes. So whether it's you or a family member or a friend, go ahead and please share that. And, again, one of the beauties about the podcast and everything, we try our best to sort of amplify great work and help accelerate these companies.
Yeah, that's great. We really appreciate that. We want to do everything we can to get patients enrolled. So that's great.
Now, I have to sort of pivot real quick and ask you some questions. We do have a lot of private investors and VCs who listen to the show and stuff. So I want to ask you some business questions. So the very first one that of course comes to mind is that I love this device. I love the mission and everything. How does Cognito make money when it's as a commercial phase company? Like the device, give us sort of the breakdown of what that are.
I'll give you what the patient journey is, because that will inform how we make money, right? So
I agree. I love that you're taking that approach and stuff, because that makes the most sense.
right. So I'm a patient. I get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. What the diagnosis, what we expect under our label, will be what is called a mini mental state exam, and it'll be a blood test to determine that there's a particular p-tau marker called 181 that it shows the presence of amyloid. So those two things will be required. The patients will then go to either a neurologist clinic or a primary care physician or to a geriatrician, and that's also really important because of the simplicity of the label, or the expected simplicity of the label. We think there's going to be a lot of physicians that will be able to prescribe Spectris AD to patients. Patients will then go through a two-step test. The first one is to make sure that they can tolerate the stimulant. And so we see about 92% of patients are able to tolerate the stimulant. The 8% that aren't able have difficulty hearing. And in the trial, we discourage the use of hearing aids and hearing support. So that's where we see about 92%. Then we put the thing, and we turn on an EEG, and we make sure that we're getting the gamma response that we want. So we know the device is delivering the stimulation and the neurons are responding to it. So it's a way of kind of guaranteeing that we're getting a treatment effect, or we're getting a response. That gives us a very personalized of what are the frequencies in which and the volume in which the patients are able to tolerate, and that it works. We then ship the device to the patients. It's what is called durable medical equipment. So it is we expect to be under the DME benefit category. Patients, we then make money through reimbursement of the DME. The DME is traditionally reimbursed over the course of 13 months. So, we're not, candidly, we're not talking publicly about pricing yet, because that is a thing that can get you in kind of murky waters until you've done really robust pricing research. But we do think we're going to be very, very cost effective compared to other therapies on the market. I mean, dramatically cost effective compared to other therapies on the market. And so that will allow us candidly to think about not just ways that we can, as we become revenue generative, and we start to see the value of Cognito realized in either the public or the private markets, that will allow us to then explore some of those earlier disease states or conditions that I talked about, whether it might be multiple sclerosis next, or Parkinson's, or metabolic health. And the thing that I'm sort of most excited about is there's an opportunity, because Spectris really is a truly novel science. There have been few very sort of novel sciences come to the market, CRISPR, mRNA, gene editing. Spectris is one of those. And so what it allows us to explore combination therapy. It allows us to think about what is Spectris coupled with GLP-1s in metabolic health or in neurodegenerative conditions. What would Spectris do with other promyelinating molecules? And would we be impactful in helping drive myelination for those drugs in that combination? Would we be impactful with the other monoclonals if we did work with them? So to me, the way that I think about this is we are very head down today to go and make sure that we deliver on the HOPE trial, that we position ourselves for a very robust regulatory submission. But what I expect the Alzheimer's indication to drive for us is not only, how we make our revenues in the first several years in a very large market, but then also how we think about where we go next in those markets. I think for years it was a little overplayed, this term of a platform therapy or a platform technology, but we do fundamentally believe that we are a platform because of the impact of the science.
I completely agree with you, and it's funny you say that. I feel like I don't know which one has been more overplayed: platform technology or companies saying that they have AI. It's pretty close, but
There was one time I sat on panels where I really wanted to hand out buzzword bingo and just sort of say, like, hey guys, like first person to say AI, first person to say platform, first person to say machine learning, first person to say, natural language processing. Like they're all dramatically overused. And I think that there's big P and small P. I think there's platforms like Amazon and Uber. Those are big P's, but then there's small P platforms that have this ability to go into various disease states. We're not serving the connector. We have real dexterity.
absolutely. And I have to pull it. Let me see. Yep. I love when I'm in my library and I specifically know exactly where a specific book is. So for the founders who are listening, if you're in neurotech or you consider yourself a platform, I am going to recommend, there's literally one book I recommend on this, and it's called Platform Revolution by Parker. Really good books.
If you give me a second, I'll grab my copy of it. I feel I am the biggest Jeff Parker and that they're good. That whole group, like that is the best book on. And I've talked to Jeff. I've actually been invited by Jeff to
Best friends.
at MIT, and I think it's brilliant, right? And
Yeah.
I think it sets this. It's so funny you bring this up. There are going to be friends of mine that listen to this podcast that are like, Christian absolutely planted platform revolution in that discussion, because this is what I took to Jeff McHowell is saying. There needs to be a platform that facilitates the exchange of value between those that are producing data and those that are consuming data to make better decisions. And there isn't one in healthcare. And so I recognize that I don't think we're a platform in Jeff Parker's world, but I do think of us as a platform in having multiple conditions that we can talk to. The other one is matchmakers. That's also a very good platform.
Oh, that one I did not know. So I'm buying that one. And just so the audience knows that Christian did not plant this, is that you guys can see here, all my books, I list the day that I bought it. This is purchased November 26, 2020. So, but
So funny. That's so great.
So,
Yeah, that's all.
I got it. Okay. So there are some questions that as a CEO, you probably can't answer, but it's my role as the host to ask these questions, just to ask them. So you mentioned about in terms of the patient journey that a lot of it starts with this blood test that tests for amyloid, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So who is the number one, who owns that market for that testing?
Yeah, it's funny. It's really emerging. Like I was just in Lausanne and in Switzerland, and there's a meeting that George Vandenberg puts on there that really starts bringing together a lot of these leaders in Alzheimer's. And there was a lot of discussion around these sort of blood biomarkers, the emergence. So the answer is I don't think anyone owns them yet. I think there is an array of companies that you can work with. C2N comes to mind and others, but I don't think anyone owns it yet. And I think it's going to vary by which p-tau you're looking for. I think they're going to have different, ways of looking at it. I think, Roche is making progress in this space. So but this is where, to me, it's the momentum and the risk in Alzheimer's today. So the momentum is in the diagnosis, right? And whether that's the presence of amyloid or not, there's a lot of debate on that. But right now, that seems to be what we're talking about, which is amyloid equates to Alzheimer's. I personally think that's going to change. I think we're going to say that it's not a cause; it's just it's a byproduct. But that's a deeper discussion. That's not for today.
Okay.
But I do think that's the market that's going to explode, which is we are going to diagnose, but it's going to create an absolute avalanche for the healthcare industry.
So yeah, because again, I think this is the exciting thing about not only new ways of treatment, therapeutics, etc., but the diagnosis realm. Because a lot of the things that we're diagnosing are after the fact, and I think with data we get better and better at predictive health. Right now, here's the thing. I personally believe that with your technology, you're doing the science correctly. You're doing everything the right way. That if you get significant traction in the Alzheimer's world, it makes a lot of sense as an acquisition target for a big pharma, big biotech company that can pair these things together in terms of their predictive abilities to diagnose ahead of time. And if they do that, they have a therapeutic, right? Very much like I think I see this very much like Intuitive. Intuitive has the ion, which is able to essentially go for a nodule in the lung, and if it's cancerous, then it converts over into a Da Vinci case, right? That worked out really well for them now that they're $172 billion market cap. So I think that's what makes sense for Cognito. But in the event that let's say that acquisition does not happen right away, and you get significant traction in Alzheimer's, again, I want to respect the mission, but I can't help but ask these questions. What comes after Alzheimer's if you are like a platform technology with a little p, Neurotech? What do you move into from there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the answer is driven by several factors. I think the answer is driven by, market opportunity and market need, right? So without question, I think it's going to be by where we can make the biggest impact. And honestly, I think it's also where we can find good strategic partners, to what you just kind of enumerated, right? So I see, for Cognito, I see all kinds of options, right? There's an option that says, yeah, do we partner with a more traditional biopharmaceutical company that's thinking about disease and conditions more broadly, right? So the Johnson and Johnsons come to mind that are thinking about, oh, we have this device space and we have a pharmaceutical space. Should we be looking across it, not concerned about the modality, but about how we treat the patient, right? So maybe it's the modality is a pill, maybe it's an infusion, maybe it's device, but we have that type of. Is it by companies like Medtronic, who have not yet turned to Alzheimer's disease, but they start to think about, boy, we're starting to build out this broad neuro portfolio, and do we need to be in neurodegenerative conditions beyond Parkinson's and others? And then I think that there's, if I'm going to go out on the creaky branch a little bit, I also think that there's a space that says this is safe, and we know that brain structure and brain volume is important to everyone, not just those with neurodegenerative conditions. How do we start to make this more ubiquitous in the market? Right. So how do we think about, right, where, and we're early on this kind of thinking, but I think about, I've seen with like CGM for decades was a tool for diabetic patients. And then as metabolic health became much more of a societal broader issue, and we realized monitoring our A1C and our glucose levels was important, now we've seen them coming out as more over-the-counter solutions.
Right. And who would have ever thought that, by the way? I'm one of those people. I paid cash out of pocket for multiple months just to get a CGM and monitor my blood glucose because I was curious,
Right. And so I think there's going to be a group of people, certainly people in their, at all ages, but certainly in the 50s and 60s. You talk to people older adults, the maintaining cognitive ability is so unbelievably important. I one time did a project, this stat still, I don't think you'll ever repeat this stat, which is, if you look at older adults that are, over 65, 90% of them, you can't get 90% of people anymore to agree on anything. 90% of them want to stay in their home. The only way older adults stay in their home is if they preserve function and cognition, if they're able to operate independently. So then the question has to be, what are the things that I can do to proactively preserve my cognition and my function? And that to me is not dissimilar to, I think, what the CGM, which is, I want to be healthy. How do I preserve my health by make sure that I'm monitoring my A1C and my sugar levels appropriately? And so I think that there's that, like that to me is a very interesting track in the future, because I do think that that then opens the door for a lot of different ways to think about who do you partner with, who's in that space, how are they thinking about, mechanisms to deliver. It becomes very interesting.
So let me absolve you from any potential risk or in getting with the regulatory department. So this is just my opinion, right, about Cognito. So before our interview, I was kind of like looking at it and thinking about it. I'm like, okay, like, let's say they own that beachhead of Alzheimer's, like what's next for them? And so in some of the research studies that were done on the value of gamma waves, a few things came up. Like one of them was like chemotherapy induced brain damage. So with mice, they found if you get them to 40 hertz gamma waves, it actually helped protect the brain cells from chemotherapy, which is great. Okay. But going into this world of the fact that since 2020, there's this strong interest by consumers to look into healthcare, right? I wear a Whoop device. Apple, they just made their AirPods essentially ear for earpieces, right?
For hearing aids,
Yeah, hearing aids. Sorry, I lost my. And there's this movement of all of big tech, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft. Like they're not going to wake up and say, oh, based on fiduciary responsibility, let's go into furniture. It's like, what's left? Healthcare, right? So that being said, the one area where I'm very excited and I hope that I'll be the first one to buy a device, because I'm very much about optimizing these things, is that improving gamma waves has really helped when it comes to treating depression. And if you think about everything that's going on today in this world, increased usage of devices. Unfortunately, for not to get political, from a variety of reasons, because of what you see on the mainstream media, generations such as Gen Z and below have increased anxiety and depression about the world they live in, all these different things. And so we don't have a training system for the brain to protect against all that, except for the fact we tell people you should just read more. Well, not everybody's going to do that. But if people have a device very much like what Headspace did in the meditation world, I feel like Cognito could be that thing when it comes to protecting, right, the brain from things like Alzheimer's, from depression. And I would love to see that as a mainstream consumer device. And if you do that, I would like to be the first one to receive a device, please. I'm putting that out.
I mean, I think, it goes back to that. It goes back to the first part of this conversation, candidly, which is talking about creating a mission that allows you the balance between being enormously focused on what's in front of you, but not limiting your vision to what could be next. And that it's a really, it's a difficult needle to thread, which is to say, look, we are very clear with what we're trying to do now, which is Alzheimer's disease. But as the CEO of the company, I also want to be thoughtful to our goal is to empower patients to have a brighter future. That's not describing any one. I'm not saying it's to empower Alzheimer's patients or to empower Parkinson's patients. It's to say, and oftentimes I don't even want to think of them as patients. I want to think of it as empowering, humans, and that then opens the door to a lot. And I think for us, it really is that balance between starvation and indigestion, right? Like we are right now, we are on a single course meal around to tease out that metaphor of Alzheimer's. But I am eyes wide open on the places that we can go to make the biggest impact for people. That is my drive. And that marries how to do well and how to do good. That marries, making sure that you have a mission, and it marries putting people first in this. So yeah, I think the horizon is unbelievably bright for us.
That's fantastic. I love it. I'm very excited for you all. And just for, we have a lot of investors that listen to the show. Is Cognito, I know you guys are still in clinical trials and everything, but are you either yourself or the company exhibiting or attending any conferences for the rest of the year or in 2020 that people can kind of keep an eye out for you, maybe try and meet with you?
100%. So we're in a raise now, so open for any kind of conversations in that realm. We're also on that BioFuture. I think I'm at, I'm going to blank on the name of the conference I'm in Stockholm, which is Bio Europe, I think. And then we'll be obviously at JPM. I'll be at the LSI conferences. I am on the road. I'm on the road show. So and I love that. Candidly, I love the question because we're looking for I don't want to say we're looking for a particular type of investor, but I'd love to have conversations with investors that understand this scope, right? That there is an immediate now opportunity in Alzheimer's, and if what we expect to happen with our study happens, then obviously that's an enormous value creating event. But I think then the opportunity to explore other areas is really amazing. I mean, that's the enormous burden of responsibility I feel, which is I like to say that I have two children, one whose job is my job is to not screw him up, and the other one is to keep him from becoming a screw up. This Cognito, my job here is really to not screw it up, is to make sure that we continue to move forward and make sure we get this therapy to as many patients in need, and we're agnostic of the disease state as possible, and we'll let the evidence drive us to where we should.
I love it. Well, look, Christian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm very excited for you all. For those who, again, listening, I want to encourage you, visit two websites. One is the main website, Cognito TX, as in treatment, cognitotx.com. And then for those of you who might have a family member, a loved one, or friend who could qualify for the new study, the HOPE study, go to hopestudy4ad.com. And the last thing I want to say, Christian, is that, in these studies, if you have a patient who's got a great story, we started doing patient stories on here. I would love to have a patient on the show, or maybe a family member, to talk about the impact of it, so that way we can really drive adoption. So that being said, thank you all for listening. This is another episode of the State of MedTech, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.